I still can't sleep with the curtains open, and it's been 15 years since that weekend in the Cascades. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face pressed against the glass, breath fogging the window, those hollow eyes staring right through me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened up there, because the police report doesn't even come close to capturing the nightmare we lived through. It was October 2003, when 5 of us decided to rent a cabin in the mountains of Washington State for a long weekend. Me, my girlfriend Sarah, and our friends Mike, Jessica, and Tom. We were all in our mid-20s, working dead-end jobs in Seattle, desperate for an escape from the fluorescent-lit monotony of office cubicles. The cabin listing looked perfect, rustic, isolated, surrounded by towering pines, and about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The photos showed a cozy A-frame structure with a stone fireplace, wood-paneled walls, and large windows that promised stunning forest views. What the listing didn't mention was that we'd be completely alone out there, with no cell service and the closest neighbor at least 5 miles down an unmarked dirt road. We arrived Friday afternoon, just as the autumn sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the trees. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth, crisp and clean in a way that made your lungs ache. Mike drove his old Jeep Cherokee up the winding path, the vehicle groaning over ruts and exposed roots. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, Sarah grabbed my hand and squeezed. "It's perfect," she whispered, and I had to agree. The place looked like something out of a postcard, all weathered wood, and peaked roof, smoke already curling from the chimney because the owner had started a fire for us earlier that day. That first evening was everything we'd hoped for. We unloaded our supplies, coolers full of beer, bags of groceries, sleeping bags and pillows, and claimed our sleeping arrangements. Sarah and I took the loft bedroom, while Mike and Jessica got the room on the main floor. Tom, always the good sport, set up camp on the pull-out couch near the fireplace. We cooked steaks on the grill outside, drank too much wine, and sat around the fire telling stupid stories from college. The darkness beyond the cabin windows was absolute, the kind of darkness you never experience in the city. When you looked out, you couldn't see anything, just your own reflection staring back at you, and beyond that, an impenetrable wall of black. Around midnight, Tom went outside to bring in more firewood from the covered stack near the side of the cabin. He was gone maybe 2 minutes before he came back in, arms full of split logs, his face pale. "There's something weird out there," he said, dropping the wood by the hearth. We all looked up from our drinks. "What do you mean, weird?" Jessica asked. Tom shook his head, brushing bark chips from his fleece jacket. "I don't know, I just had this feeling, like someone was watching me, and I heard something moving in the trees, something big." Mike laughed, already drunk. "Dude, it's a bear, or a deer. This is the woods, man. Things live here." But I noticed Tom didn't laugh. He kept glancing toward the windows, and I saw him check the lock on the front door twice before he finally settled back onto the couch. I should have paid more attention to that moment. That was the first warning. We all went to bed around 2 in the morning, exhausted and pleasantly buzzed. Sarah fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing deep and steady beside me in the loft. I lay awake for a while, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin, the settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Eventually, I drifted off, warm under the heavy quilt, Sarah's body curled against mine. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the front porch. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, the creak of old boards under weight. Then they stopped. I held my breath, listening. Sarah stirred beside me but didn't wake. The cabin was silent except for the soft crackle of dying embers in the fireplace downstairs. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, moving from one end of the porch to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I carefully extracted myself from Sarah's arms and crept to the loft railing, peering down into the main room. In the dim orange glow from the fireplace, I could see Tom on the pull-out couch, sitting up, his eyes wide and fixed on the front door. He must have heard it too. The footsteps stopped at the front door. The handle rattled. Once. Twice. Then, whoever was out there tried the door. I could hear it straining against the deadbolt. Tom was frozen on the couch and I felt ice water flood my veins. The rattling stopped. For maybe 30 seconds there was nothing. Then the footsteps moved again, slower now, around the side of the cabin. I heard them pass beneath the loft window so close I could have reached out and touched whoever was walking by, if not for the glass. Then they faded toward the back of the cabin. I climbed down the loft ladder as quietly as I could. Tom looked at me, his face pale in the firelight. "You heard it?" he whispered. I nodded. "Should we wake the others?" I asked. Before Tom could answer, we heard a new sound. The scrape of something against the back door, metal on metal, like someone was trying to jimmy the lock. Tom jumped up and we both moved toward the back of the cabin, where a small door led to a mudroom and the rear entrance. Mike's bedroom door opened, and he emerged, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Someone's trying to get in," Tom said, and the fear in his voice made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Mike's expression changed instantly. He moved to the back door and peered through the small window set into it, cupping his hands around his eyes to see into the darkness. "I don't see anyone," he said. Then he tried the handle, locked. The scraping sound had stopped. We stood there in the dark for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes listening. Nothing. Just wind in the trees and the settling of the cabin. "Maybe it was an animal," Mike finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That wasn't an animal," Tom said quietly. "That was a person walking on the porch. That was a person trying the door." Sarah and Jessica emerged from their rooms wrapped in blankets, eyes heavy with sleep. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, and I went to her, put my arm around her shoulders. "We think someone was outside," I said, "trying to get in." Jessica's eyes went wide. "Are you serious? Where are they now?" We all looked at each other. "Gone, I think," Mike said. "Or hiding," Tom added, and I wished he hadn't. We decided to stay up the rest of the night. All 5 of us gathered in the main room with the lights on. Mike found a rusty crowbar in the mudroom and set it by the door. Tom stationed himself by the front window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. Every few minutes he'd announce, "Nothing, I don't see anything." But we could all feel it, that sense of being watched, of eyes in the darkness beyond the glass. When dawn finally broke, pale and grey through the trees, we all exhaled collectively. Morning felt safe. Morning felt rational. "Maybe we should just leave," Jessica said over coffee. She'd barely slept, dark circles under her eyes making her look gaunt. "Go back to Seattle, cut our losses." Mike shook his head. "We paid for the whole weekend, and it was probably just some homeless guy or a drunk from town." Morning light, he probably realized there were people here and took off. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as us. "We'll be fine. We'll just make sure everything stays locked, and we'll take shifts keeping watch at night." Sarah looked at me and I could see she wanted to leave, but I nodded at Mike. "It'll be okay," I told her, squeezing her hand. "We'll be careful." God, I was stupid. We were all stupid. We spent Saturday trying to reclaim the vacation vibe, but it was hollow. We hiked for a few hours, following a trail that wound through the forest, and the whole time I felt like something was following us just out of sight. Every snapped twig made us jump. Every rustle in the underbrush brought us to a halt. When we got back to the cabin in the late afternoon, Tom walked the perimeter, checking for footprints or signs of disturbance. He found them near the back door, boot prints in the soft earth, large, maybe size 11 or 12. They circled the cabin multiple times. Someone had been walking around our cabin, testing the doors and windows, and they'd done it more than once based on the overlapping tracks. We didn't hike again that day. We stayed inside as the sun set, watching through the windows as shadows lengthened and darkness swallowed the forest. We played cards by lamplight, but nobody could focus. Every sound made us tense. Around 8 o'clock, we heard a truck engine in the distance growing closer. Headlights swept through the trees, and a pickup truck pulled into the clearing. An old man climbed out, weathered face and flannel shirt, a shotgun cradled in his arms. We all froze. Tom opened the door a crack. "You folks staying here?" the old man asked. His voice was rough, like gravel. Tom nodded. "Yeah, we rented the place for the weekend." The old man spat into the dirt. Thought I'd come check. Owner asked me to keep an eye on the property when it's rented. You having any trouble? We all looked at each other. Actually, yeah, Mike said, stepping forward. Someone was trying to get into the cabin last night. We found boot prints all around the place. The old man's expression darkened. That right? He looked out at the trees, then back at us. You see who it was? We shook our heads. Just heard them, I said, walking around trying the doors. The old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, There's a fellow lives back in these woods. Squatter, I guess you'd call him. Built himself some kind of shelter a few miles in. He's not right in the head, if you know what I mean. Keeps to himself mostly, but sometimes he comes around the cabins looking for food or supplies. My stomach dropped. Is he dangerous? Sarah asked, her voice small. The old man shrugged. Never hurt anyone that I know of, but he's unpredictable. You see him, you call the police. Don't engage with him. He looked at the shotgun in his hands. I'd lend you this, but legally I can't. You folks have a way to protect yourselves? Mike held up the crowbar. The old man snorted. Better than nothing, I suppose. Keep your doors locked. He usually loses interest and moves on after a night or two. After the old man left, we sat in stunned silence. A night or two, Jessica repeated. He said a night or two. That means this guy might come back tonight. Tom stood up, started pacing. We should leave right now, just pack up and go. But it was already full dark, and none of us wanted to drive down that narrow, winding road in the pitch black, not knowing if someone might be out there. We'll stay tonight, Mike said. Keep watch. If anything happens, we call 911 and barricade ourselves in one of the bedrooms until help arrives. Sarah pulled out her phone, stared at the screen. No signal, she said. There's a landline, I reminded them, pointing to the old rotary phone on the wall by the kitchen. Tom picked it up, listened. It works, he confirmed. That gave us some comfort, but not much. We went to bed earlier that night, around 10, but nobody expected to sleep. Mike took the first watch, sitting in an armchair by the front window with the crowbar across his lap. Tom had the second shift at midnight. Sarah and I lay in the loft bed holding each other, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin. I want to go home, she whispered. I know, I said. Tomorrow. First light we leave. She nodded against my chest. I must have dozed off because I woke to Sarah's hand clamped over my mouth. Her eyes were huge in the darkness, terrified. She pointed toward the loft window. My heart hammering, I turned to look. At first, I saw nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw him, a man standing maybe 20 feet from the cabin, just at the edge of the tree line, tall, wearing dark clothes, face obscured by shadows. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching the cabin, watching our window. I pulled Sarah close, both of us frozen, not daring to breathe. The man didn't move for what must have been 5 full minutes. Then slowly he raised one arm and pointed directly at our window. At us. I felt Sarah start to shake. The man held that pose, arm extended, finger pointing for another endless moment. Then he lowered his arm and walked toward the cabin. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling down the loft ladder. Tom was asleep in the armchair, so much for keeping watch, and I shook him violently. He's here, I hissed, outside, right now. Tom jerked awake, grabbed the crowbar. We could hear footsteps on the porch again, but this time they weren't tentative. They were purposeful, confident. They went straight to the front door and the handle turned. The deadbolt held. Then came a sound that made my blood turn to ice. Knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. We stared at the door, not moving. Another 3 knocks, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Still we didn't move. Then a voice muffled by the door, but clear enough. I know you're in there. The voice was wrong somehow, too flat, emotionless. Let me in. Tom grabbed the phone and dialed 911. I could hear his whispered conversation with the dispatcher. Someone trying to break in. We need police. Here's the address. The dispatcher said they'd send someone, but it would take at least 30 minutes, maybe 45. The mountains were a long way from town. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. The knocking stopped. Footsteps moved away from the front door, around the side of the cabin. Sarah and Jessica had come out of their rooms now, and Mike emerged looking terrified. We all gathered in the main room, backs to the fireplace, watching the windows. The footsteps circled the cabin. We could track his progress by the sound. Front porch, north side, back door, south side, front porch again. Around and around like a predator circling prey. Then he stopped at one of the large windows facing the forest. We heard a tapping sound, fingernails on glass. We all turned to look. He was there, face pressed against the window, hands cupped around his eyes to see and past the lamplight. In that moment, I got my first clear look at him. Gaunt face, hollow cheeks, patchy beard. But it was his eyes that made my skin crawl, flat and dead like a shark's eyes. He stared at us, and we stared back, frozen. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something else, something hungry. He raised his fist and punched the window. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. We all screamed. He punched it again, and a spiderweb of cracks spread across the pane. "Get back!" Mike yelled, pulling Jessica toward the bedrooms. Tom grabbed a chair and wedged it under the front door handle. The man punched the window a third time, and his fist went through, blood streaming down his arm. He didn't seem to notice or care. He reached through the broken glass, fumbling for the window latch. His arm was inside the cabin now, groping blindly. Sarah screamed. I grabbed a lamp and brought it down on his arm as hard as I could. He pulled back, and for a moment he was gone from the window. We could hear him breathing out there, harsh and ragged. "Upstairs!" I shouted. "Everyone upstairs now!" We ran for the loft ladder, all 5 of us scrambling up into the small bedroom space. I pulled the ladder up behind us. It was the kind that could be lifted to prevent access. We huddled together on the bed, listening. Below us we heard the front window shatter completely. Glass rained onto the floor. Then footsteps inside the cabin. He was inside. He was inside our cabin. We heard him moving around down there, slow and methodical. The scrape of furniture being moved. The crash of something being knocked over. He was searching for us. "Where are you?" he called out, that flat voice echoing in the main room. "I just want to talk. Why won't you talk to me?" None of us made a sound. Sarah had her face buried in my chest, shaking violently. Jessica was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Mike had his arms around her, and Tom still gripped the crowbar so hard his knuckles were white. The footsteps moved to the base of the loft. We could hear him down there, looking up at the opening where the ladder should be. "You're up there," he said. It wasn't a question. "I can hear you breathing." We held our breath. Then came a new sound. He was dragging something across the floor. Looking down through the loft opening, I could see him pushing the armchair toward the ladder space. He was going to climb up. The chair wasn't tall enough, but the kitchen table was, and I watched in horror as he started dragging that across the floor too. That's when we heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens in the distance growing louder. The man heard them too. He stopped moving the furniture and stood there, looking up at the loft. "Next time," he said, and his voice was almost casual. Then he walked out through the broken window, and we heard his footsteps retreating into the forest. By the time the police arrived, 2 sheriff's deputies with flashlights and drawn guns, he was gone. They searched the area, but found nothing except his bloody handprints on the windowsill and his boot tracks leading into the deep woods. They told us he was a known figure in the area, a man named Earl Hutchins who'd lived rough in the mountains for years after being discharged from a psychiatric facility. They'd picked him up before for trespassing and petty theft, but he'd never been violent. They seemed almost embarrassed by the whole thing, like having a mentally ill hermit terrify tourists was bad for the county's reputation. They helped us board up the window, took our statements, and suggested we might want to cut our trip short. We didn't need the suggestion. We packed our things in record time and were on the road before sunrise, driving down that mountain road like the devil himself was chasing us. The strange thing is, we never saw the news reports we expected. No arrest of Earl Hutchins, no follow-up from the police. When Mike called the sheriff's department a week later to ask about the case, they told him they'd searched Hutchins' camp and found it abandoned. He'd vanished into the mountains, and they had no leads on his whereabouts. For months after, I'd wake up in the night, certain I heard footsteps outside my apartment. Sarah and I broke up within a year. We couldn't be in the same room without remembering that weekend, without seeing each other's fear reflected back. The cabin is still there, still being rented out to unsuspecting tourists. I checked the listing once a few years ago. It had new photos and a fresh coat of paint, but I recognized it. And in one of the photos, taken from inside looking out through those big windows, I could swear I saw a figure standing at the tree line, just standing there watching. I never went back to Washington State. I avoid the woods entirely now. And every night before I go to bed, I check every lock in my house twice, sometimes 3 times, because I know the truth that the police report doesn't say Earl Hutchins wasn't trying to rob us. He wasn't looking for food or supplies. He was hunting, and once a predator finds prey, it never really stops. Sometimes, late at night when the wind rattles my windows, I think about that flat, dead-eyed stare, and I wonder if he's still out there in those mountains waiting, watching, remembering the ones that got away.